It is with great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Shafa, who is coming from Walnut Creek, and his subject today is Sufism Reoriented. And I have to mention here before going to his biography and telling you something about his background is the fact that today in Farsi program, he was talking about his own experiences, how he became Baba. It was so fascinating to me, not only because of the stories that he was mentioning about, also his own special and peculiar experiences that he went through. So it is very interesting. So hopefully in the future talk, so hopefully he will talk about his own experiences and how he became a Baba. Dr. Shafa graduated from Johns Hopkins University. He had a doctorate degree in physiology. And he used to teach at the Tehran University and before coming to the United States and living here for good, I believe. And the second time when he came, it was during the revolution, Iranian revolution, which is when he came here. I think it was in 1979, if I'm correct. Then, before coming to this country, he was instrumental in translation of God Speaks to Farsi, as well as discourses. It was a fundamental thing that Farhad contributed, and we are so happy and we are so fortunate to have these two books already available in Persian language. And as a matter of fact, several people so far, by reading these two books, have joined Baba and become a Baba.
Wow.
Yes, it's very, very interesting. Also, in addition to that, he wrote a book. It's called The Secrets of Divine Love. And again, it is in Farsi. And as a result of that book, I know personally that some people, Iranian people, Farsi people, became Baba lover just by reading that particular book. He has also written so many scientific articles in the famous journal in the United States. And then it is fascinating to know that how he became a Baba lover and then joined Sufism in Walnut Creek. Without any delay, please welcome me to join me in welcoming Dr. Farhad Shafa.
Well, Meherabad is going to have fun today. It is natural for a family to want to know about extensions of the same family. And I was yesterday at a family reunion in San Diego where our extended family got together, and each group or sub-family was very interested to know what the other sub-family was doing and what they were up to, what they had done. And so it is not a surprise that this family of Baba is interested to know what this family of Baba up a little north is doing and what has happened and the history and all of that. And I'm very, very grateful to be here and share with you some of my information. But of course there's a lot of information. So I have decided that maybe it would be better for me to focus on kind of a certain section of this book that is not organized in any kind of single format for people to read. But then there is another section of it that is already available in written material. The section that is available in written material, and I won't go into, is Sufism since Murshid Adus passed away. We have a book called Participation in Sufism, which describes all of that. And I brought a few copies just in case there were people who were interested, and they can read it and then send it back to us. It has a self-addressed and paid envelope. It's actually FedEx. So if anybody's interested to pursue that, that is available. But what I will talk about is primarily what is not available in one clump anywhere to read. And I must admit that I plagiarized my Murshid. I'm going to tell you I have lifted from his notes and his research. He does all the hard work, and we just, and he's generous enough to share the results with us, and so we just take advantage of that. So, to begin with, I want to say that we are going to kind of go into interesting new places. I'm going to introduce some new places and some new names and people that you may or may not have heard about, and then I'm going to tie them all together. So initially you might find that things are kind of scattered, but then they'll come together, Baba willing. The material that I will cover with you, most of it is available in publications, a variety of publications, but some of it is not. Some of it are some personal letters that were exchanged between Meher Baba and lovers of Meher Baba who were instrumental in bringing about Meher Baba's Sufism. And so you may, I'm sure that some of you who have read everything that Baba has written, that is available on Baba, may still find some new stuff here. Now, Sufism. We were talking about the letter S. Maybe we should wonder this coincidence here that that 7 S's and where they came from and all of that. Now, people back there are saying that I need to speak louder, and unfortunately I can't speak any louder. Is there a way to boost the sound up for folks back there?
It sounds good back here.
We're okay.
Does
We're
it?
fine, yeah.
Well, Shiri Khanum is about my age, and I know what she means. She's younger than me, but still.
Even at my age, I can hear.
You can?
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to speak louder or closer to the microphone, and hopefully it'll work. Thank you, I'm fine for now. Yeah, that's... So now, where does the name Sufism come from? There are many stories about the word Sufism and where it came from. Some say it comes from the word Safa, which means purity, Sophia, which means wisdom. But there is one that I like the best because it is probably the closest to the truth. And that is the fact that Sufism, which goes to the anteriority of time, has been the flavor of spirituality that has always been devoted to the latest avatar. The reason that Baba said, I love Sufism with all my heart, and his favorite poets were Sufis, and his favorite music, which was Qawwali music, is a Sufi music, is because Sufism was the expression of mysticism associated with his advent before Meher Baba, which is Muhammad or Islam. So we talk about Sufism as a mysticism that is focused on the avatar. In the case of the word of Sufism itself, the previous avatar. In the case of Sufism reoriented, Meher Baba, that is the focus and the origin of Sufism for this age. So we trace our lineage to Meher Baba, And we will go into detail as to how he made it happen. Another thing that one may read about the origin of the word Sufism has to do with Ashab al-Sufi. In the time of Prophet Muhammad, there were a group of mysterious people that nobody knew much about. They sat on the veranda of the Prophet, silently mostly, and when others were curious about them and would ask the Prophet, "Who are these people? What are they doing here?" he would say, "Leave them alone. I know who they are." And that is the origin that I would like. Because of the Sufi and Sufi, it became Sufi because they were Ashab al-Sufi. So those were the original Sufis who sat on Prophet's veranda. And of course, in the time of the Prophet, he was focused very much on the external aspect of life, and he gave laws through the Quran. And you must realize that he came in a land that had no civilization. They buried the girls alive. They knew nothing about hygiene. And so he had to educate them on many levels. And if you think he suffered in this life, which he probably did more than that time, but he really suffered a lot during the advent of Muhammad. But now we have a new Sufism, and we're going to do justice to it by reviewing a little bit about its past and then seeing what Meher Baba did with that past. Now some names and places. I want to introduce to you a man by the name of Hassan Nizami. In 1952, beloved Baba had started Manzil-e-Mim. As you know, that was his first ashram, where he trained his early mandli. During that time, he had a biography of his master, Upasni Maharaj, published, and he wanted it translated into many languages, including Urdu. So he asked his Muslim followers and people around him, who is the most prominent and respected Islamic spiritual figure, because I want him to write the biography for my master. He did not want anything but the best for his master. And people said, well, there's no doubt, there is one man and his name is Hassan Nizami. Hold that thought. By the way, in 1923, Hassan Nizami came to visit Baba. Not only did he write the introduction, he was asked to write the introduction, he wrote the introduction, and according to Ghani, he wrote a grand introduction. But then he came and he met Meher Baba in 1923. Okay, I want to now introduce to you a city called Ajmer. Ajmer is a city in India. And in the Islamic world in India, it is among the most sacred of cities, because that is where Muinuddin Chishti is buried. Now, who is Muinuddin Chishti and why is he so revered? Even so that Meher Baba, from the very early 20s, would visit Ajmer and the shrine of Chishti often. And one of the people he would visit there was a mast by the name of Chota. Chota was one of those rare individuals who was on the seventh plane, and he was a mast. And Meher Baba did work with him. But over the years, Baba visited Chishti's shrine many, many times. Well, Chishti was the man who brought Sufism from Persia to India. And according to Baba, he was a perfect master. He is the one who started the tradition of the Qawwali music that Meher Baba calls his favorite music. He was succeeded by another perfect master, which is very unusual in Sufi lineage or any spiritual lineage, called Fariduddin Qand-i-Shakar. And they say Qand-i-Shakar means sugar. And the reason that he was named that is because he went into this divine state of ecstasy and sat under a tree to the exclusion of eating or drinking or anything. And ants would gather around him. And to divert the ants, people would put mounds of sugar all around him. And people would gravitate. And beloved Baba has some very sweet stories in the discourses about Fariduddin Qand-i-Shakar. He talks about, I won't go into there, but he has very sweet stories about it. And then Fariduddin Qand-i-Shakar was succeeded by another perfect master, which I think is probably the rarest thing in any spiritual tradition, to have three perfect masters in succession. And his name was Nizamuddin Awliya. Nizamuddin Awliya, many of you may have heard of his name. His tomb is in Delhi. And again, Baba used to visit his tomb often and would visit that area often whenever he was in Delhi. and Baba identified him as a perfect master. So that is the very beginning of Sufism. And the Sufism that became Sufism reoriented traces its lineage directly to Chishti and Nizamuddin Awliya. And remember the name Hassan Nizami that I mentioned earlier? Remember the Nizami part. It has to do with the fact that this man is from the lineage of Nizamuddin Awliya. Okay. Another thing I want to tell you about Chishti is that he lived around the 12th century. You know, beloved Baba has this precious jewel on his ring that he wears on his little finger. This precious jewel is called the earth. And occasionally he goes and shines it. He breathes his divine love into this jewel. And the 12th century was such a time. You find St. Francis in the east, you find Milarepa, you find Rumi, you find Chishti, you find cathedrals soaring into the skies with their awe-inspiring atmosphere. And as we look through history, we find that there are periods when Baba goes on this jewel that represents something. Okay, another place, Hyderabad. Hyderabad is very closely and intimately related to Baba's work because of many things. For one thing, it had the most concentration of musts anywhere in the world, even in India. So Meher Baba would go there for his must work. During his new life, at the end of his new life, he went through a very, very serious period that he called his Manonash, annihilation of the mind, and that phase was in Hyderabad. He had a cave there where he isolated himself in seclusion and did his Manonash work. And after the new life, he said, "This is my real birth." So, Manonash was very important, and new life was very important in Baba's life, and it is associated with Hyderabad. You see, all of this talk about Sufism is an excuse to review Baba's life and history of life. So anyhow, another place, Baroda. We know that name probably more than the other names because of the Maharani of Baroda, who had put at Baba's disposal her palace in Pune, called Guru Prasad. Baroda was one of those kingdoms in India that had its own municipality and its own Maharaja. And the Maharaja of Baroda and Maharaja of Hyderabad were among the wealthiest. The Maharaja of Hyderabad, in fact, was the wealthiest because they had the richest sources of jewels in that part. And during the 1500s, when it was called Golconda, it was a very flourishing place. And during Baba's life, whenever Baba was in Hyderabad, the Nizam would extend his hospitality and would put at Baba's disposal his palaces. So, Baroda is where we will begin our story. Just as Chishti brought Sufism from Persia, from Iran, to India, there was a man, a wonderful man, named Hazrat Inayat Khan, who brought Sufism from India to the West. He suffered greatly in this mission, but he was, according to Baba, a true saint in the fifth plane and a true murshid. He was born in Baroda in 1882, so he was older than Baba. And he came from a family of musicians. His grandfather was a well-known musician and spiritual figure who took Inayat under his tutelage. And Inayat had a great gift of music. And he became a professor of music and a favorite at the court of the Nizam of Hyderabad. And so he moved there and he lived there. And he was a spiritual seeker. And he would go to different spiritual teachers to see if they would accept him. But all the spiritual teachers would shun him. Finally, he went to the most respected of all the spiritual figures, of the Sufi spiritual figures in Hyderabad. And one day when he was at his house, he all of a sudden felt, the host said, "Oh, we better get ready, the master is coming." And so they got ready and they cleaned up the house, and then in a few moments, there's a knock at the door. And there's this gentleman, very worldly looking, very ordinary looking, but a radiant person walks in. And this very highly regarded spiritual figure considers this man to be the master. And it turns out that man was Murshid Madani, who became the teacher of Inayat Khan and a fellow student of Inayat Khan, Hassan Nizam. So that's where the two figures come together. Hassan Nizami and Inayat Khan were both students under Murshid Madani. Hassan Nizami became the most revered spiritual figure in the Islamic tradition in India and wrote the introduction to Baba's biography of Upasani. And Inayat Khan brought the message of Sufism to the West so MeherBaba could blow light into it. And the way it happened was that before Murshid Madani passed away, he said this to Inayat Khan: "Fare forth into the world, my child, and harmonize the East and the West with the harmony of your music. Spread the wisdom of Sufism abroad, for to this end you are gifted by God." And so in 1910, at the age of 28, Inayat Khan came to the United States and then to Europe and brought the message of Sufism. He had a very difficult life. He had dark skin, so he was treated as a black person here. And in those years, you can imagine how difficult it must have been. He talks about one incident, for example, and he was this refined, distinguished, sensitive man. And he comes here, and once he went to rent a piano, and they asked him to leave a deposit, which he did. But the piano was not delivered, so he went back and said, "What happened to the piano?" And they said, "What piano?" He said, "I left a deposit." And one of the shopkeepers tells the other one, "Have you ever known me to rent anything to a black so-and-so?" And so that was the kind of treatment that he would get in this country. And it is interesting that the beginners of Sufism in this country suffered the prejudices that existed in this country to the fullest. Murshid Inayat Khan, because of the color of his skin, and Murshid Rabia Martin, who succeeded him because she was Jewish, because she was a woman. We'll get there later. So, in the person who succeeded Murshid Inayat Khan was a lady by the name of Ada Martin. And the way it happened was that Ada Martin, who, as I mentioned, was Jewish, had developed this thirst for something that she didn't know what it was, a spiritual thirst. And she had looked everywhere. And finally she heard that there was this Indian figure playing music, and she went to hear him. And this is how Murshid Inayat Khan describes Rabia Martin. "I saw among the audience a soul who was drinking in all I said as the Hamza, the bird of Hindu mythology, who takes the essence from the milk, leaving the water. So this soul listened to my lecture on music and grasped the philosophical points which I was making. Afterwards, she thanked me as everybody came to show their appreciation after the lecture. But I saw that there was some light kindled there in this particular soul. Well, Rabia Martin was aflame. She learned where this man was going to give another concert, which was in Seattle, and told her husband, "I'm going to Seattle." And in those days, to just take off like that was something. So she went up to listen to Inayat Khan in Seattle the following day. Now that night, Inayat Khan talks about having an unusual experience. Inayat Khan talks about all of a sudden seeing that his hotel room is filled with bright light. Such a light that left no corner to darkness, that filled everything with light. So the following day he gives a concert. Rabia Martin goes and listens to the concert, and after the concert, she goes to see Inayat Khan. And Inayat Khan recognizes what that experience was. She brings her to her hotel room and initiates her right away into Sufism. And he says that I recognized, let me see if I have that quote here, the light of illumination that would flow from this student to all who contacted her, a light of such radiance that it would leave no trace of darkness. And you must realize that it was Rabia Martin who brought Sufism to Meherabad, which filled it with light. So that experience was fulfilled. Murshida Martin spent the next 9 months away from his teacher, but under his guidance, studying and doing practices and all the things that she was asked to do. But then there came the call for her to go to New York, where Inayat Khan was, and she spent 3 months with Inayat Khan. As his secretary, he was present when he gave interviews and essentially was hanging around all the time, except for 3 hours when she had to go to the library and study. And Inayat Khan had told her what to study. And at the time, Inayat Khan, of course, it was an Islamic approach to mysticism, so the idiom, the language, and so forth was Islamic. So Hafiz, Rumi, Arabic, all of these were part of her studies. And then, at the end of that 3 months, Inayat Khan appointed her as a Murshida. Now, in those days, Murshidas or Murshids could be appointed who were assistant teachers, who were really assistant Murshids or assistant Murshidas, who kind of is what Baba named preceptors in Sufism reoriented. And she did not see her teacher again until 1923. So this was 1912 to 1923. She did not see her teacher because her teacher had gone to Europe to start the Sufi movement in Europe. Inayat Khan got married over there to the daughter of Mary Baker Eddy, any of you who know. And that was another great difficulty because the parents disowned the daughter. They did not want her to marry a dark-skinned Indian from this savage place. And they had several children, one of whom was Noor Inayat Khan, who became one of the most celebrated figures of the French underground during the war, and was killed in a Nazi camp. But Murshida Martin traveled through the Middle East on his teacher's instructions, and also went and visited Inayat Khan in Paris during one of Inayat Khan's summer sessions there. In late 1926, Inayat Khan went to India for the first time after having left it, and went to visit his buddy, Hassan Nizami, in Delhi. Then he got ill and he died in 1927. And he's buried just around the corner from Nizamuddin Aulia, where our beloved Baba used to go and frequent so often. It's a very sweet area. I've been there. Whenever there is a succession, there is an upheaval, because spiritual forces have to be reorganized and set loose. And so when Murshida Inayat Khan passed away, and he had appointed Murshida Martin as his successor, which, by the way, he had renamed Rabia Martin, after the great saint Rabia that Meherabad said became Babajan. So there were a lot of people, a lot of dissension, and many people did not believe that, could not accept the idea of a diminutive Jewish woman being something like Inayat Khan. And so they just went and followed some of the relatives of Inayat Khan. But before his passing, he had left Inayat Khan had left a charter with his friend Hassan Nizami to the effect that Murshid Martin would be his successor. Then, let's see, in 1938, Murshid Martin was fairly old by then. She felt the call to go and travel around the Middle East again and in India. And this travel lasted 13 months. The amazing thing is that this diminutive Jewish lady, wherever she went in her travels to contact Sufi teachers, she was respected, she was regarded as an authentic teacher, she was initiated if that was the right thing to do, and she was very highly praised. I ran into an interesting young man in Berkeley who was studying Persian literature, and he spoke fluent Persian. And he was a follower of Nur Bakhsh. Some of you might have heard. He's a Sufi teacher from Iran, and they traced their lineage to a perfect master that Meher identified, who was buried in Kerman. Alan told me that he had been in Kerman, where Murshid Martin had visited many years earlier, and that still the old ladies there remembered Murshid Martin and spoke of her when she had visited. So she was a teacher of some significance. Meher did not say what plane she was on or any of that sort, but her contemporaries and other spiritual teachers seemed to regard her highly. And when she went to India, visited Hassan Nizami confirmed her and gave a public gathering to reaffirm her position. And also on February 25th, 1939, of course they didn't know that was Baba's birthday, it just happened that on that day, Hassan Nizami gave a message in which he said, "A time is coming when America will lead the world spiritually," and asked Rabia to prepare it. So Murshid Martin returned to America, but she was on a quest. She felt that things had to change with Sufism. She felt that there was a new energy to be poured into it. She felt that she did not know how to do that, and she felt that any spiritual teacher knows that there are great masters, the Qutb Irshad that Baba talks about. And she was determined to find the Qutb Irshad, which is the pivot of the spiritual hierarchy, and to lay the Sufism at the feet of this pivot so that it could be enlivened. She felt that the time had come, but she didn't know how or where. As it happens, in 1941, Baba had asked Narina Machabelli to go around the United States talking about him, telling people about Baba. And Narina, as you know, was an actress. She was married to a Russian diplomat who left Russia and came and opened a perfumery factory here. The Machabelli Perfumery, some of you might have heard. And of course she became a devotee of Baba in 1931, and in 41 she was going around, from 41 on for a few years, she was going on talking about Baba. In 1942, Norina and Elizabeth were on a tour to the West Coast, on a mission to find a land suitable for Meherabad's spiritual center, what became the Myrtle Beach Center. So in California, they were looking for land, and they also were giving talks on Baba. And Murshida Martin went to one of these talks. As it happens, this talk was given in a building called the Masonic Temple, which was 1290 Sutter Street. 20 years later, that very building became the Sufism Reoriented Center. For some years, and now of course it's in California. It's in Walnut Creek, but first Rabia Martin heard about Baba in that building, and she felt that this must be it. But she pursued them, learned more about Baba, read all of the books that she could, and then Baba invited him to stay with Narina and Elizabeth at the Myrtle Beach Center. This was in 1945. And then after the stay in Myrtle Beach, she went to New York to stay with them. And it was during this period that she really learned who Baba was. And her heart just exploded. And then she wrote some letters to some of her students and her daughter. She wrote a letter to her would-be successor, Ivy Dews. The experiences, dearest Ivy, I have passed through since last we met can never be recorded. I'm paraphrasing from the different parts of the letter. We are now living in an avataric age when the force of divine providence is walking on earth. Every great murshid and master in the Sufi hierarchy contributed higher and still higher teachings, until now we have become part of the avataric message and under the direct guidance of our chief. He is the world teacher. And to her daughter she writes, awake and know the whole world will go through a turnover never before experienced. Then reading another part. May God illuminate your heart so lovingly and so clearly that you will understand your greatest opportunity on earth today to come towards Meherabad, humbly, simply, without hesitancy, and learn who you are and how you can experience and know God. This is what I am doing. This is what I want above all in this or any other world. Amen. Well, to wake you folks up a little bit, brought you to a point where Murshida Martin felt that the chalice of her heart was turned over, and she basically offered Sufism to MeherBaba. And she wrote to MeherBaba, so I must cry out and ask you to come and fill my heart and our hearts, so full of love that only love can remain. Oh, come and lead us consciously through the mazes of our limited existence to the limitless love, light, truth, God. And so that was the open invitation through which Rabia Martin put Sufism at Baba's feet and gave reality to Inayat Khan's experience of the filling of Sufism with light. Now,
would you please be sitting, because there was noise in that?
Yeah, this is just part of the letter. She ends the letter. I must cry out and ask you to come and fill my heart and our hearts, so full of love, that only love can remain. Oh, come and lead us consciously through the mazes of our limited existence to the limitless love, light, truth, God. And it is a long story. She continues, with whatever love and light thou hast granted me, Rabia. She rededicates it to the service of her beloved Divine Master of humankind. Lovingly, faithfully, Rabia. So Rabia gives Sufism to Baba. But the actual taking of Sufism and the reshaping of it doesn't quite happen so easily. A lot of suffering that goes through. Baba writes, among other things, Baba knows you. He knows how you feel. He knows how you aspire. He knows how you love. He knows what you desire. He sends his deepest love and blessings from his infinite heart. So, the other figure we need to talk about is Murshida Ivy Dus. She was born February 25th, 1895. Same day as Baba's birthday, 1 year later. Her father was an engineer who worked with Edison. She herself was a very talented singer and a pioneer. Before the years that women worked at all, she wanted to be a lawyer. She served in World War I. She had no brothers and there were no men in her family to serve, and she felt that it was her obligation to go and serve her country. So she volunteered, and she was put as a driver, I think, for a Red Cross ambulance. Then after the war, she worked in South America as a representative of a bank. She was an editor of Century magazine. And actually in South America, she met the man who became her husband, Terry Dus. And Terry Dus became a very influential person in getting the oil of the Middle East for the United States, which MeherBaba encouraged him to keep doing, and probably helped him do it. And so Terry came to know the King Saud of Saudi Arabia, the ambassadors and the high society there, and Murshida Dus had to be the wife of this diplomat, an international diplomat who knew how to entertain royalty. Among the people that she came across was the ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States, and that ambassador's family. They were Druze, which is a sect of Islam. But all the children except one became Baba lovers. And you may know some of them. Zuhair, who plays Baba in the plays that we have, Khaled, Selma, all the children are with Baba. But her life was, Murshida Dus's life, Ivy Dus's life, was at that time that of a wife of a diplomat. But then she became interested in alternates to religion. She couldn't find satisfaction in the ideas of religion, and she was seeking for something. And so she looked in every possible nook and cranny, including astrology and tarot cards and philosophy and I don't know what. And actually it was through astrology that her astrology teacher brought the chart of a particular woman that really interested her. And she said, I want to meet this person. So she went to meet this person, and the person opened the door, and it was this diminutive Jewish woman named Rabia Martin. So she, after her first session, Murshida Dus felt that she didn't want to have anything to do with her at all. That was not her idea of what she was after, and so she did not go there. But according to Rabia Martin, Rabia Martin knew that she would be a student, and actually in 1941, she started kind of training Murshida Dus. After Rabia Martin had gone to Baba and she felt that she had to tell everyone about Meher Baba, she of course told Murshida, Ivy Dus at the time about Baba. And Ivy Dus corresponded with Baba and read all of his books and began to get interested and felt that because her Murshid had said that Baba was true, then Baba must be true. But then Murshida, after the experience that Murshida Martin had in New York, she became very ill. It is not unusual that when Baba breathes his divine love into a structure, that structure becomes inflamed, and that searing and ripping and force can be devastating in some ways. And so one of the results was that Murshida Martin got very ill. Another aspect of it was that the structure of Sufism began to unfurl, in the sense that many did not want to accept Meher Baba. They felt that Inayat Khan had brought this Sufism. What Meher Baba said did not resemble anything that Inayat Khan said, and that they felt there was a betrayal here to Inayat Khan by Murshida Martin accepting and introducing Meher Baba. So Ivy Dus went to visit Rabia Martin when she was very ill. And she was so ill that she had no energy or possibility of dealing with any of this. And so even Murshida Dus herself had questions about whether she should continue the Sufi way or not. And actually she wrote to Baba and said, at present, there is no sign that you are coming to America as yet. And I have taken the liberty of writing and asking if it is right that I should go on in the Sufi way. So even Murshida Dus felt that maybe Sufism was not the right thing. Another piece of history that I need to mention is that Murshida Martin, after 1945, decided that she needed to go and visit Meher Baba. But she was old and she needed someone to accompany her. And there was no young man that was free to accompany her. And she wrote to one of his students who was the Murshid of Sufis in Australia, Baron van Frankenberg. He led the Sufis under Murshida Martin in Australia. And this man sent Francis Brabazon, young bohemian man. Murshida Dus called him my first hippie, to accompany Murshida Martin. But then Murshida Martin got ill and passed away. But Francis continued to stay in this country. And at one point, again, Murshida Dus went to meet Murshida Martin in San Francisco, and she describes that as soon as she entered Murshida Martin, who was on the sick bed, Murshida Martin broke into tears and kept repeating, "At last the Murshida, at last the Murshida, at last the Murshida," and appointed Ivy Dus as a Murshida of the Sufi order, but again as a not the Murshida, but as one of the kind of assistant teachers, assistant Murshids. A few months later, maybe 1 month later, she got a telegram. "Ivy dear," this is from Murshida Martin. "Ivy dear, today I have named you as my successor. With all my blessings, devotedly, Rabbi." Now, this was the shock of her life for Murshida Dus. She had a very full life. She had come to Sufism to find some peace of mind, and it was not her thing. Her life was full enough. And here, all of a sudden, she finds herself the Murshida of the Sufi order. She said, it really paralyzed me. I was so astonished. I had never dreamt of such a thing. And she didn't know what to do. She didn't feel she was a Murshida. She had no idea what to do. And so she was thinking, well, maybe I'll forget all about it. But then she said one day, sent to her all the letters and all the correspondence of Murshida Morton and Murshida Nath Khan. And one night she stayed up all night reading them. And she realized how much suffering, how much hard work, and how much love had gone into this thing that is now Sufism. And now she's entrusted with this, and she did not have the heart to just throw it out. And so she felt that she needed to contact Baba and put the Sufism at Baba's feet once and for all. But the opportunity was not presenting itself until miraculously her husband was called to Saudi Arabia, and this time he could take her family. His family. So Murshida Dus and Charmin went with Terry, almost Raphael, and again doors opened miraculously for her to make it over to India. And later Baba said, I called you. And then there's a very lovely passage that she describes her first meeting of Baba that I'd like to read. This was in her own memoirs, written just for her own records. So bear in mind, it was not written for publication. But it's very sweet, so I'm going to read it to you. And Raphael is going to accompany me. As we drew near the hut, I could feel the Master's love streaming forth from it, and I burst into tears. No one paid attention, but said it was a quite usual reaction. Finally, we were in the presence. He sat in a lotus posture on the gadi, his image entirely surpassing all my expectations. Although he's 53, Murshida was 52 herself. After we garlanded him, he motioned me gently to come and sit at the edge of the gadi. Charmin sat on one of the benches. The others stood near the door. Although I knew he had been silent for 20 or more years, he did not seem to need to talk. You knew what he wanted to say to you, and his use of the little alphabet board with which Adi K. Irani and Dr. Ghani and Dr. Duncan all read with such skill and clarity was hardly needed. He silently commanded me to stop weeping. Then he helped me do so. He smiled and said, "Now, tell me, what are you so confused with?" So Murshida said that, it's this thing called Sufism. I've been, it's a sinking ship, and I've been given this thing, and I don't know what to do with it, and I don't want it. You have it. And said essentially that she felt she was, promoted prematurely to the status of a worship. She had no idea, and she didn't feel that she had the qualifications of a teacher. And Baba says, "You're honest. That's good. That is what really counts. You have not seen God and you have not realized Him. You see me as a person, but you do not see me as I am. I will help you to see God and realize Him. Do not worry. I will help you with these matters. You cannot teach anyone something you do not know. But as long as you're honest and say, I have not yet realized God, it is enough. Say, I can help you, and you can help me. For that is the way life is. Actually, there are only 5 real murshids in the whole world today. And so, Murshida says, his hands are delicate, yet strong and most expressive. No one could resist his charm and love. One look in his eyes, and you are not quite sure whether you are meeting yourself or looking into eternity. Charmin and I felt as if we had always known him, and he was our counselor, our friend. He terminated the interview smilingly, and we filed out, filled with such new gladness. Now, I know that we are running close to deadline, so maybe I should stop now so we can have time for the final piece. And that way you can invite me to come back and finish the story.
Before we leave, is there any question?
When Baba said that there were really only 5 murshids, was he referring, do you think, to the 5 perfect masters? And does murshid...
No, the number happens to be the same, but it is, the perfect masters are not all associated with Sufism, and they may not even be known publicly. But murshids have to be known because they have teachers, and they don't have to be perfect. One of the things that Meher introduced to Sufism as he reoriented it was that before him, even a person on the 5th plane was eligible to assume the role of a murshid. But Meher upped that level and said that in his Sufism, the murshid had to be either illumined, which means on the 6th plane, or be a perfect master.
Do you know if Baba ever said anything about Murshid Ajidus being a Murshid?
He said that you are not, a Murshid, you don't see me. He didn't say what plane she was on, but he just made it very clear that she was veiled. And he said, I take responsibility for your actions as long as you're honest. And that I want you to build a strong foundation for Sufism. And that is what Murshida was tasked to do. And to the very end, she just worked under Baba's guidance. But I can tell you from my own experience, one of my experiences, I was going to be initiated by her. So I went to see her and she fed me lunch. And after lunch we sat together. And then we started to talk and she said, you know what, dear? I'm not going to initiate you. Your destiny lies in Iran. You have to go back there. She said, if Baba were present here today, he would tell you that himself. And as she was saying that, I could feel that Baba was right behind her, saying that my destiny lay in Iran. And as it turned out, it did. Baba had work there for me to do. And I went there and I did that. So that was the kind of way, or one example of the way that Baba worked through her.
I mean, did Ivy, could she like read auras or things? Because I had an audience with her one time in 1970. I was asking for permission to quote from God Speaks on a radio show that I was doing. And she said to me this bluntly, why do you want to do this radio program on MeherBaba? I said, I don't know. She looked at me like sort of over my head. And she sort of says, well, okay, if you want to do it, you go ahead. But did she have that ability, like to see auras?
She never spoke about it, but I
never
think if she needed to do something like that, Baba would provide it. But she didn't at all kind of say that she had any of that sort of ability. I know that Baba guided her, and she was confident that Baba would guide her, and through the correspondence that I haven't read to you, Baba makes it very abundant that she would guide her through her work. No, she didn't make, that wasn't my experience.
You know, another thing what's amazing about her life, you said she was 52 when she really became the Murshid. Mm-hmm. And probably in her life, she was probably somebody very special in the fields that she was involved with. I mean, is there something on that she excelled in her
She was
personal
extremely competent in whatever she did, and as I mentioned, she was a pioneer in the sense that as a woman she broke into fields that were hitherto very difficult for women to be in. And even now, yes, even now. And so Virginia knows from personal experience how difficult, in those days especially, that was. And so even that alone is an accomplishment that is hard to. But
very brave woman.
she was. And then then she came back she went to meet Baba, she came back, and then she started to tell everybody about Baba, and then there was this avalanche of controversy and really blatant criticism of her, and that if you leave Baba away, everybody will follow you, and all of that. And she had to write all of these letters to people. And Baba had told her, be kind to people, because each is on their own level of, perception and spiritual development and so forth. And so if they can't accept me, that's fine. And, then just let them go on their own way. And with others, they could not do without the practices that Murshid Khan had left and Baba had abolished. What Baba did was that he abolished Sufism as it was. He took away all the practices and all of that, and also all the membership. There was only maybe 5 or 6 left by the time that Baba wrote the charter and actually started the reoriented. The slate was clean, it was completely his then. And he built it the way he wanted it with Murshida. And of course, Murshida took a tremendous amount of heat even the very last days of her life for doing what Baba had asked her to do, and other people who didn't understand it. Yes?
In reference to Sufism reoriented, how has Sufism reoriented changed you, or do you think you could have gone on in your life if you never became a Sufi? In other words, what I'm saying is, was it a passion that you were drawn to become a Sufi, or was it just something that you happened to come into by chance?
Well, I think it's probably similar to your experience with Baba. How would you answer that? If somebody were to ask you, how would have your life been without Baba? Did you decide to go to Baba? How did it happen to you? It is the same thing with Sufism. It is just, it is life that is kind of part of your destiny, and Baba guides you to, and for me it had been very clear from the very beginning that this was my path, and because I felt the way I felt for the first time I met all the Sufis in the room, I knew them. I just felt a kinship with them. With Murshid Adus, I felt the same, a deepest love you can't imagine. With our current Murshid, it is unbelievable the bond we have. It is, one of those things that, you can't help. I think if you can't help, you should run away. but then it comes a time that you can't help, because it is the bond of love, and there's no thinking about it. There is no justifying it. There is no what shoulda, woulda, done, coulda, that sort of thing. It just is. Right.
I always ask myself, you know, when like sometimes I go through one of the most important books of Baba, which is God Speaks. Baba actually uses a lot of Sufi's term and explain a lot of the state of being and then the path of you know, consciousness and spiritual growth and so forth, through what we know from the past as Sufism and what we've learned from the past. And it appears that Baba is trying to establish that link or somehow bring it back again, or maybe give it a new life or something. But you know, I was going to ask you, how do you feel about it?
Well, I think I have a quote here actually, which I didn't get to, where Baba says, just as Sufism got its force through Muhammad, Sufism reoriented will get its force through me. And it is a path to God. It is not the path to God, it is a path to God. And Baba organized Sufism reoriented as a template. In fact, he said that Vedantism reoriented, Buddhism reoriented, all the other isms could be fashioned after this structure that he took great cares to put together in the charter. He would have correspondence with Murshid Adus during the period that he was in the pain of his accident, and sometimes he would send messages with just one word, different, change this. And then he would take ideas, but then he dictated the final charter, and he sent it here to be typed, and he said it has to be in India by November 15th, or it won't happen. Got to India November 13th, Baba signed it with his own name, and sent it back. So he took great pains of making that it was the correct thing. I must apologize. First of all, let me tell you that I do have those books, as I mentioned. If anybody's interested in the current state of Sufism, I'd be happy to give you one. But I have to take a bio break, and I'll be back shortly.